Welcome to Love and Live Abundantly. I'm Ilona.
I'm Bill. Do you want to love more effectively?
Do you want to live fully and love more courageously?
We talk about what all that means
and how you can achieve it. Join us. Hello.
Hello, everybody. This is Bill Mock and my associate, Ilona. She's taking care of some of the IT stuff right now. We're here after a little bit of a hiatus. There was a lot of, full disclosure, a lot of illness in my family, and we were unable to make it the last few weeks. But thank God we had Ilona around to take care of business. And I tell you what, Ilona and I talked about what we were going to deal with today, and it looks like she's about ready to let us know what that is.
Yes, all those things behind the scenes. I'm not a professional tech person. And so, yeah, that took it took us a minute to get started here, but here we are. And it's been a little bit. Bill has been ill, and I don't know, I just didn't feel right without doing the podcast with Bill. So I'm happy that he's back and we're back on track. And while he was gone, there's a couple of things. Bill's really one of your expertise is in limerence, right? And so
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, that's a bit of a surprise. I thought we were dealing with something else first, but let's do that.
Yes.
That's good. In general terms, I do this set of classes for people, and it's called Love, Lust, and Limerence. And the reason I do that is because so many of us confuse the three, that we call everything love, when in fact what actually is happening for some folks is lust, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but it ain't love, as some people find out to their chagrin. And then there's this other thing called limerence, and one day Ilona and I will delve a little more deeply into what love is and how to make it happen and how to do it. But right now, we agreed we'd talk about limerence, and let me just do the introduction that way I would in a class. In 1977, there was a Dr. Tenoff, a woman, psychologist, who was studying love. All this, what it is.
Bill, you broke up there. You cut out. So
I want.
Oh, well, and it looks like we just lost him. So let's see. Oh, there he is. He's back.
I just lost connection. I just got bumped off the internet.
Yes. Yeah, but
I
you're
don't know.
back now.
But I checked. I checked this morning. Anyway, are we still recording?
Yes, we are still recording. And so we heard that in 1977, there was Dr. Tenoff, a woman psychologist who was studying love. And then you kind of went out. So
Then I went out. Well, I'm back.
yes.
And the reason she studied love was to be able to define it in all of its dimensions, physical, spiritual, emotional, psychological. And in the process, she discovered this thing called limerence that she called limerence. And it's a it's something that almost all of us have experienced in our lives, thank God. And it's something that many of us, if not all of us, sometimes mistake for genuine love. Uh, and it's essentially shorthand. It's a form of wonderful insanity. It has all kinds of physical dimensions, all kinds of symptoms, if you will, and it has all kinds of emotional components that feel very much like love. And it's what most people call falling in love, where you're just swept away, where you're just uh, knocked down, pursued down the street by wonderful love. And the the thing about it is if you're lucky, you feel it, and it evolves into love and a more durable long-term relationship. But it's not love. It's limerence. So now, what do you want me to do? You want me to talk about some of the symptoms?
Well, yeah, so you're saying limerence is not love and it's not lust.
Right.
It's its own thing. And in
Yep.
that, it's like it's like falling in love where we feel really great and things feel everything is aligning and things are but it's those beginning emotions and that excitement of a new partnership.
Yes. And more. And
Okay.
and when you start to list some of the symptoms of limerence, you recognize them as the kinds of things you hear in romantic songs.
Okay.
Um, Things like there's a romantic song from the 30s called "You're Not Sick, You're Just in Love," and they list a whole bunch of the symptoms of limerence. Um, Let me give you one example. I know that you've experienced this. I think we all have, where we have a friend who's just discovered somebody new. Oh boy, I think I'm in love. And what we see with them is they're just obsessed. I mean, you can have a conversation about taking a rocket to the moon, and the next thing you know, they're talking about the new love interest. Or you can talk about agricultural practices in Burma, and next thing you know, they're talking about the new love interest. And everywhere, every flat surface, they've written their name. And they're on the phone with them all the time. And oh my Lord. And finally you get to the point where you say, I'm going to the bathroom so I can get away from you for a minute. It's obsessional. Everything orients around that person. But and And the thing is that they're filled with this elation, and more importantly, they're filled with a hope that the other person will reciprocate. And they go through these wild kind of mood swings of being immensely happy and then a little bit uncertain and then really kind of disappointed. And oh my Lord, they get nuts. It really is crazy. And for a psychologist, if I want to study schizophrenia in people who are not schizophrenic, I just have to look at somebody who's suffering from limerence because they have all the symptoms of schizophrenia relative to this relationship.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're delusional. I mean, the last time you knew somebody who was suffering from limerence, when they described the person that for whom they were limerent, You would have thought that they were a number 10 on a scale of 5. They were perfect and intelligent and funny and sexy and all of it, the full package. And then you meet them and you think, well, nice person, but
Not all that.
not all that. But in their love has its own eyes, right?
Yep.
Well, limerence has its own eyes. And the delusion is believing something that's real evidence shows isn't true, but you hold on to the belief. Uh, and and we see that all the time. Well, and in its most extreme cases, people will be so delusional they think that people are sending them secret messages or reciprocating even when they're not.
Mm.
But in its best case, it's falling in love. It's being obsessed with that person and thinking they're wonderful.
Well, and making up stories in their head, right? I mean, they're letting perhaps their imagination get a hold of them, and
Well, and they're substituting a picture in their imagination for the reality. Yeah,
okay.
that's a delusion.
Yeah.
And physically, there's all kinds of neat symptoms, but one of the things about it is a change in the heart rate. And we make jokes about people's chest going pitter patter. Well, that's not a joke. That's what happens in limerence. The heart
Okay.
rate actually flutters.
Huh.
Yeah. And the blood pressure changes and body temperature changes. Yeah. So that they flush. And when you look at somebody's eyes who's limerent, when they looked at their loved ones, their pupils dilate.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So that if you're sitting in front of somebody and they're looking at you and they're kind of have that goofy little grin on their face and their pupils dilate, you know what they're telling you? They think you're something special.
Okay.
In fact, a little side note, advertisers on television, when they do a close up on somebody who's looking at a beautiful product, one of the things they do, watch for it. One of the things that they do is they have the eyes dilate.
Really?
And because unconsciously as human beings, we recognize that.
I mean, I knew that emotionally reached us, right? They play on our emotions to get us to buy their products, but to actually make somebody's eyes, pupils dilate during the filming of a commercial, that just seems that sounds obsessive.
But it works. It works.
I'm
And
sure.
the vast number of people don't recognize that that's what they're seeing, but they see it. And if there's somebody sitting across from you and their eyes dilate, they're either on drugs or the other reason that I look at this limerence thing is because many of these kind of symptoms are things that we see in folks who have a problem with drugs and alcohol, who are addicted. And part of the brain that lights up during limerence is a part of the brain that lights up during craving for drugs.
Mm.
And that helps us to explain why in AA and NA and there's other self-help programs, they tell people who are trying for recovery not to engage in a new relationship in the first year
Oh, yeah.
because it's too much like their addiction.
I had somebody that wanted to date me after he overdosed on alcohol, and it was like 2 weeks after he got out of the hospital. And he reached out to me, and I was like, no, I know you are not supposed to. I didn't say this, but I mean, I said no to him, but like, I know you're not supposed to be in a relationship for at least a year. Otherwise, and then I don't want to be responsible for your dependency on me, instead of the alcohol. right? Like
Mhm.
I want a healthy relationship. And that includes you recovering from your alcohol addiction,
Yeah,
right?
the folk wisdom of AA is that the old timers tell all the new people no relationships in the first year because that leads to relapse. Because once your brain starts working in that relapse sort of way, if you're a confirmed addict, that's where it takes you
So,
to that relapse.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I like, he's a really great friend of mine. I've known him for, 22 years. And I'm just like, I
Yeah.
don't want to be the one, right? Like, to push you towards relapsing. But there was something there that you said that I wanted to touch on. So, I talk a lot about rewiring your brain and, creating new things for yourself. So you had mentioned that in AA, they have you wait a year because your brain isn't yet you're right. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like what the process is from the addicted brain to the year later,
Oh my God. Sure. You mean now?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, Start with for an addict. What happens is that they fill their lives, that the drug of choice becomes the organizing principle in their life. Everything connects to it through the course of every day, either wanting it, looking for it, acquiring it, using it, getting over it. Everything that goes on every single day goes on around one of those things happening. That's how the drug becomes the organizer, which means that there's this thing called an associative link that between the drug and its use and that thing out there in my environment, the color of the walls, driving to work, somebody calling me a name, the kind of breakfast that I have, all kinds of things that happen in my life have now become associated with that drug use. And they can trigger, and they're sometimes called triggers, and they can trigger a relapse because they're associated with the drug use. Right? So what has to happen during that first year? And then in some old timer senses, for even 4 more years after that, is that new things have to get associated with those things in my environment. So if I see somebody in a gray coat and that used to be associated with my using a drug, it now has to be associated with something new. And those rituals that I used to use around my use, they have to be turned to something else, to something more wholesome that in AA they call recovery. So one of the things they do in AA, NA, and all the rest of that is it can best be described as a whole big bunch of rituals and prayers and sayings and slogans and cliches and things to do and places to go. All of that stuff is all associated with one word, and that's recovery. And so now all of those cues that used to connect to the drug can now start to be connected to more wholesome stuff, like going to meetings and going to church and seeing your family and working in a charity and helping to support others in recovery and that kind of stuff. Um,
So for example, I think an easy one is, if you were used to, on Fridays going out for happy hour every night, you would then replace that gathering with a meeting.
an AA meeting, maybe. Yep.
But
Or
I,
you might,
go
or you
ahead.
might call your sponsor and have a chat, or you may meet your sponsor for a cup of coffee instead of the drink or the drug that you used to grab on the way home. Yeah.
So when we're in this limerent state, is are we
Well,
in control of
now
our
we're back to
brain?
limerence. Okay.
But well, I mean, is
Yeah.
our brain still functioning as it normally would, or do we reprogram our brain to not feel that limerence? Because I feel like limerence may not be a great thing if you're all hyped up in that, and then it doesn't work out.
Well, one of the things they say about limerence that makes so much sense is that it is a necessary human condition. That in fact, Tenoff really studied bonding and how we go about bonding. And she's saying that's one of the first steps in bonding. It's almost a trial run. But more importantly, she suggests that it's important to survival of the individual and the human race. That that limerence, if let to run, runs between a year and a year and a half. And she points out,
Just enough time to have a baby.
how about that? Exactly. Just enough time to have a baby and to support the baby during its earlier months. So can we say for certain that's the reason? But it sure does. It sure is an interesting coincidence. Yeah.
It is, and then it's like, well, and then once that limerence is gone, right, then people don't necessarily want to stay together.
That happens, doesn't it?
It happens. Or yeah, or they'll stay together and then get divorced, or um,
Well, and here's the thing. They think that's love.
yeah.
But the thing that keeps people together is love, not limerence. So you got a year to get to know each other, to be respectful and loving with each other. And if you have good role models from when you grew up, you know how to do that. And you got a shot now at turning that limerence into something beautiful. But in my practice, what I found was that a lot of folks think that's love. And so they go into a marriage and 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, well, they're kind of coasting and they're looking for love and they're not finding it. It's kind of love has died. That's what they say to me when they come into my office. I still love that person, but I'm not in love with them. That means I'm not in limerence with them. There's a family therapist, famous one, who said one of the leading causes of divorce is people seeking limerence and finding it outside of their relationship.
Huh.
The first dose of limerence is free.
Say
You
that
can have limerence, it's free,
limerence is
but you
free.
the first dose, and it comes upon you. Can you have it again with the person that you love? Yeah, but you got to work for the next one. And people talk about, well, let's be romantic. He's just not romantic anymore. That's right, because he's not limerent, and he somebody didn't tell him that he needs to work on it now.
Okay,
Limerence is free. Love has a price. You got to work on
got it. So let's talk a little bit more. Where were you going to go somewhere else?
it. Huh?
Oh, um, about the symptoms. So, you had mentioned a few different things, that feeling of excitement, and so that's just our brain automatically reacting, correct?
From a very deep level, from a very old level. That's our lizard brain. That's
Okay.
our automatic brain.
Yep. Yep. And so does trauma affect that? Does a trauma affect limerence on
Oh
how
my
we
gosh.
see things?
Oh my gosh. The connection between trauma in my practice and limerence is that if you suffer a significant trauma when when you're being exposed to limerent forces, those become associated. And we wonder why people connect with relationships that they should ought to know aren't good for them because they've never been good for them in the past, but they keep doing it over and over and over again, and they always end up in a train wreck. Well, it might be because the first time or two that they suffered from limerence, they were also subjected to very traumatic kinds of forces, and now they've become associated.
So can you give us an example of that?
Sure, from chemical dependency. Back in the 40s and 50s of the last century, we had really good research that showed that if you're married to somebody who has a drug or alcohol problem and you divorce them, that your odds of marrying somebody with a drug or alcohol problem has gone up about 80%.
Why?
I mean, that's pretty phenomenal.
That's a lot, yes. And but why? Well, and I feel like the same thing happens where um, you know, my father was abusive, right? And so you either someone like me will either end up with somebody who was abusive, right? Or the a 360 where like I am clear, right? Like I've done a bunch of work so that I don't fall into that category of choosing the abusive,
Knock wood,
huh?
knock wood,
Yeah.
knock wood. It's interesting that it's almost paradoxical that you can spend your life not wanting to be a certain way. And then one day on a Tuesday, you discover, oh, gee, how did that happen?
No.
I got to be that way.
Yeah.
Uh, Self-disclosure. My father, my bio dad, was one of the most abusive human beings that ever lived. And I spent most of my youth promising myself that I would not be my father. My father was also a raging alcoholic. Well, I had to spend a lot of work. One of the things I had to discover was obsessing about being abusive is the same as obsessing about not being abusive. There's just no difference. You're still obsessing about abusiveness.
Yeah.
Instead, I had this really good counselor person who said, maybe you ought to obsess about how to be this other man. And I said, which other man? He said, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. What does that other man look like? That's who you should be moving toward instead of moving away from that abusive image of yourself. Move towards find people in your life who are not abusive and who are nurturing and loving and kind and strong.
It was interesting. Yesterday we had gotten together for my mom's 80th birthday.
Yeah, we did. It
Yes,
was fun.
and it was a great time. And I realized that, of course there's you and Linda, right? That I've known for forever. But the other people that were there were all people that I had done personal development work with. we
Hmm.
we've all taken some sort of classes together, maybe not in the same room, but we've taken the same courses with the same company. And so we have different kinds of conversations, right? Like how you and I are talking here, that's things that I talk with those friends because we talk about those things because that's just our conversation because we've gone through the personal development and we have those open conversations. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know where I, oh, but it, oh, so that's what I go for almost forgot for a second. But the fact that, and I had said to my mom, I said, that's interesting. At this event, it was all people from this personal development, as well as, another event that I had a couple of weeks ago. And most of the people there had done the personal development work with me. And I feel like it's keeping that like-minded people around me, right? Like I feel that if I go back to New York, I have to play a role and not be who I really am because nobody there talks about things, right? And
Right.
and so that's what I feel even with addiction, it's finding those people. I know we're all over the place today. Talking
No,
about
we're
all
not.
sorts of different things. But I feel like having that good support group, and that might not be those people that you're used to, right?
Mhm.
That you would expect to be there, right? Like the people you used to drink with, you know, 30, 40, 50, I don't know how long years ago, are not the people you keep company with today.
By and large, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And the people that you do, the monkeys, aren't most of them all in recovery?
I think you need to tell folks what you mean by the monkeys. I think could we clarify that for a moment, please?
Yes. Yes. So you explained it. It's your monkey group.
There's a group of us who travel together called the Dirty, and we call ourselves the Dirty Monkeys. And we go places together. And yes, most of us, it's interesting, most of the men don't drink. And most of the women do, but they drink like human beings, and most of the men and most of us men drank like monkeys or pigs or rats, or we didn't drink real humanly. And so none of us drink. And and I don't think that we decided to form the Dirty Monkeys so that we would have a support group, but it was evolutionary because they were comfortable people to be with. And we don't sit around talking about recovery, but we don't sit around talking about our last great drunk either.
Well, and I feel like there's a different kind of space held for each of you, right? Like yesterday, we didn't talk about personal development,
No,
right? There
no.
were a bunch of different, but there was that certain foundation, right? For me, I mean, you didn't really know anybody else except for your wife and me and my mom, but those people were
But
safe.
there was an atmosphere.
Yeah, and it was a safe place, even though some people may not always say, whatever. It was an environment where, like, if you were to put me in New York with some of my family there, I would have been on edge. It just because of the people that we surround ourselves with, and and that support group. But we are just about at time.
Goodness.
Yeah, so I don't know where we're gonna pick up next. We have plenty to choose from.
Well, let's pick up here.
Okay.
Let's go back to limerence and the way your brain works, and then tie that back to trauma. And
Okay.
then and maybe we could then go to, well, how do you evolve something like that out into something more positive? Because you talk about doing work, but that's how you frame it. But it a little more detail, I think, would be helpful. What
Yes.
does doing work mean
Yes.
in both of those arenas?
Yes. Yes.
Can we do
Absolutely.
that?
Because, I mean, the name of our podcast is Love and Live Abundantly, and that's what we want to bring people to, right? Because we all have this stuff happening in our own worlds, and the goal is to love and live abundantly, and we're here to help people get there.
See you next time. Oh, I'm supposed to give a message here too, and I forget what it is. What is it? See, I go away for 2 weeks and I have to be retrained.
Any questions or anything you'd like us to discuss? Please email me at hello@truthbetold.world. hello@truthbetold.world. Thanks for joining
Okay,
us.
bye.